I'm delighted to welcome everybody to the second event of the Royal Academy Engineering's Cafe series. My name is Allan Jones and I chair the Academy's Industrial Fellowship Scheme Committee, and I'll be chairing this afternoon's session. The Academy's Cafe series, which stands for Connecting Awardees, Fostering Engagement, is just one part of the ongoing support for current and previous awardees, and we hope to build this activity further. The series will cover a broad range of topics, and the discussion will feed into the Academy's policy work. This is the second in the series, and we're delighted to welcome you to our discussion on industry engagement today. We'll begin with a brief introduction and then a conversation with our guest speaker, followed by an opportunity for you to pose questions. Before we move on then, I just remind you of the Zoom meeting etiquette. Firstly, could I ask that you switch your mobile phone and laptop notifications to do not disturb? Could you please remain on mute unless you are participating in the conversation, but feel free to have your video on. Please make sure that you're in a quiet space. Please note also that the main session will be recorded and may be published on the Royal Academy of Engineering's website. When we get to the question and answer session, in order to submit your questions, could you simply click on the chat feature, which is located towards the bottom of your screen, and type your question into the open field. Alternatively, if you wish to verbally ask your question, please click on Participant, which is located towards the bottom of your screen, and select Raise Hand. I'll give you an opportunity to put your question to our guest speaker, and we'll cover as many questions as we can in the time allowed. So timing-wise, once we actually get through the introduction, we will then have a fireside chat. Well, it's billed as a fireside chat, but I think with most of us experiencing record temperatures outside, I think the suggestion is it's more like a poolside chat. But that's essentially the order of play today. We've got until 4 o'clock. I think the Q&A session should actually sort of enable us to get up to about 3:50. We'll do some summing up at that stage, but hopefully we can get through the business by then. So business research and development is the foundation of productivity and growth, and most particularly, I suppose, now in this post-COVID world, or the post-COVID world, when it actually happens. University research collaborations have a vital role in providing business with new processes and technologies, and also highly skilled people and access to world-leading experts. From my perspective, give you a bit of a background as to why I'm so passionate on R&D. I started my career back in 1975 as what they called a research officer with the old Central Electricity Generating Board, which has obviously morphed into the various companies that supply electricity nowadays. In those days, the nationalised industries actually had essentially research organisations which were more like universities but without any students. So the ability to really sort of push back the boundaries of technology development. That's where I got involved with a lot of universities, and the collaboration that I think works well between industry and university in being able to go hand in hand into the sort of new technology development landscape. I've, as I say, been passionate on R&D. I actually managed to spend the whole of my life in R&D, ending up as E.ON's head of R&D and managing their engineering and science organisation with branches both in the UK and also in Germany. I retired in 2011, and that gave me the opportunity of seeing how the other side works. So since then, I've been working with some of the universities at that industrial interface, trying to bring some of the experience that I actually had on the other side to make sure that the relationships developed strongly and sustainably. And therefore, it gives me great pleasure, I think, to sort of help in trying to continue this in my role as chair of the Industrial Fellowship Scheme Committee at the Academy. For academics, collaboration with businesses can provide the opportunity to address challenging research questions with real world applications, and to see the work has tangible impacts and gain access to new skills, data or equipment. And of course, with the emphasis now on that from REF on demonstrating impact, it's much more important that relationships with industry are strong, sustainable, to enable essentially the best to get out in terms of measuring impact. So today, I'm delighted to introduce you to our speaker. She is Professor Eileen Harkin-Jones, OBE FREng, and Eileen is the Bombardier-Royal Academy of Engineering Professor of Composites Engineering at Ulster University. And I'll hand over to Eileen to give you a little bit more of a thumbnail on her career and tell us essentially what she does currently. Eileen, over to you.
Okay, Alan, thank you very much. And I'd just like to say it's great to be part of this event today. I started my career, I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree from University College Dublin and went straight into industry, worked in industry for about 5 years in polymer processing. After that, I went back to college, to Queen's University Belfast, to do a PhD again in the area of polymers, because I was really inspired by what I had been doing in my career to date in industry in that area. I then spent a further year working as a consultant in industry before joining Queen's University Belfast as a junior lecturer in 1993. I was appointed to the Boxmoor Chair of Polymer Engineering in 1999. That was in Queen's, and that was an industry-funded position. And then I left Queen's in 2014 to take up the Bombardier-Royal Academy of Engineering Chair at Ulster University. So I've basically been there since. And I think probably you can gather from what I've just said that I've spent most of my time, most of my research has actually been in collaboration with industry, right back from when I started my PhD, which was an industry-sponsored project as well. So I have a great interest in that area and in those collaborations. So that's about sums it up, Alan.
Thank you, Eileen. I think it's great that we've both actually had some experience on both sides of the fence, which I think actually enables this chat to be sort of quite productive. And I think that we can actually develop some ideas in terms of what the benefits are, what the pitfalls might be in trying to sort of go through that, but also, I suppose, the levels of engagement that that universities and industry can actually pursue. So just in a nutshell, just kicking out on a very general question, how do you think engagement with industry does really benefit research and researchers at the universities?
Well, I suppose in terms of research, the main benefit is that if you're collaborating with industry, then obviously your work is being informed by industry needs. And the results of the research work that you are doing are evident fairly quickly, and the impact is very visible. So for research, that's great. It's great advertising that your work is being put to good use fairly quickly. From a researcher's point of view, I think there's huge satisfaction to be able to see the results of your work very quickly. And it's a very different thing seeing the results of your research being applied in industry compared with having a journal publication, for example, that's sitting on a shelf somewhere. So you're seeing immediate impact, economic, environmental, or whatever. The other benefit, I think, which is not often considered, is that it really helps your teaching as well, because your teaching is well informed by what is actually happening in industry, and you can refer back to that, and it makes it much more interesting for your students. And I think the other thing for researchers, for PhD students and for postdoctoral students, they who are working on these projects, they are gaining a little bit of experience of working with industry as well. And then that helps them in their future careers, be it in the industry or in research, because they've already started to make those connections with industry. So I would say those are key benefits.
I think you make a very good point, yeah, indeed, about the importance really in terms of how academics can go back to university and moderate and modify their teaching to actually bring into the university much more of an understanding of what goes on actually into academia, or what goes on in industry. And I think that that's a very major feature of the industrial fellowship scheme, because that's really one of the pillars that we're expecting essentially to be able to benchmark, and that is how much people do bring back from their period, their secondment actually in industry to the teaching. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important there. I mean, everything sounds rosy, and I think that you know, we can sort of see how there are these wonderful benefits, but there are obstacles. And can you sort of articulate where you may have encountered sort of some of these obstacles in your industrial engagement?
Yeah, I would say probably the main obstacle or issue is that, especially when you're starting off or you're engaging with companies for the first time, it tends to be that they want results very quickly, and quite often they're not willing to wait for a 3-year project. They tend to want results, say, within a year time frame, or even faster than that in some cases. So that can be a difficult obstacle to overcome. The way that I have tended to work with that is to try and get, you know, just to take the industry point of view and say, maybe work on something like a knowledge transfer partnership initially, where you're doing quite high level research with the company. You've got a graduate engaged with them, you're doing some supervision, and you're getting to know the company, and the company's getting to know you. And at the end of your 1-year KTP or whatever, you've done something useful for the company that they are starting to put into practice. At that point, I have generally found that the company is beginning to realize that in order to make further advances, that they are going to need to do some more fundamental research and maybe go a little bit lower down the TRL level. And at that point, then you can start to get the company more interested in, say, a longer term project, maybe EPS or C funded project or whatever. But it's that initial obstacle to get, you know, to get your objectives and their objectives to match up and to produce something useful at the end of it. I'd say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point, really. I think that obviously, if you're working with industry, I guess there is a sort of like an implication that you may be working at rather higher TRL than perhaps the councils have previously funded. I think for those of you that don't know the terminology, TRL, technology readiness level, obviously the technology readiness level, when it's high, around 9 or so, it's almost commercially in the marketplace. When it's really down at 1, it's really just a blue sky idea. And I think that from my perspective, even from industry, that we can't expect all activities to only start at TRL 3 or 4. There needs to be essentially some blue sky thinking, and that's really where the universities, I think, are very, very good. But I think it's essentially, as you've just pointed out, it's getting the engagement to start with, and then I think maybe industry understanding that basically getting more of a grip on some of the fundamentals is really very important. And I think it's those levels of engagement which I think are important all the way, as you say, up until maybe the co-location situation, which I think you're involved with in Northern Ireland. So, you know, can you tell us a little bit about the Northern Ireland Advanced Composites and Engineering Centre and some of the benefits and maybe problems of having this co-location with industry and academia?
Okay, so the Northern Ireland Advanced Composites Engineering Centre was established as a joint initiative between Ulster University, Queen's University, and then a number of local industries. They're generally within the advanced materials and aerospace sector. They are co-located in the NIAS Centre in Belfast, which is actually situated on the Bombardier site. And the companies who are involved in that centre pay a fee for membership, and they then can take advantage of collaborations with the two universities. We have joint research projects. The companies work together themselves as well. So the benefits to our researchers would be located in the building, and some of the key benefits from that is building relationships between the researchers and the people working in the centre. So, for example, it's something as simple as meeting up with people for the morning coffee break or sitting down with them at lunchtime means they're starting to develop, they're having these conversations about, well, what are you doing in your research? You know, what's important to you in, you know, in Bombardier? What are the key challenges in Bombardier? So you're starting to build links and break down barriers between the two sectors. So that is a really important part of it. The other important bit is that there's a business-to-business interaction there between companies who have not previously worked together. And that is one of the, I think, unintended or, you know, one of the most successful aspects is that these companies, some of whom would have seen each other as competition in the past, are beginning to see that there are actually benefits from working together. And you have a lot of companies within the supply chain situated in that building. So what has happened, for example, is that some of the projects that I have been involved with have had maybe 3 or 4 companies from a supply chain in a very large project. And we've had one particular example where a large company within this supply chain and within a project had been buying a lot of its components from overseas, discovered that the company within this research project had some capacity in that area, but the research project that we did with them meant it built their capacity further, so that then this larger company was able to bring the business back into Northern Ireland to the company that was within that supply chain. So, I mean, that had paid great dividends for everyone involved in that work. So I think there are huge opportunities that pop up as you get more and more involved with these collaborations that you just never would have expected at the very beginning. I would say in terms of problems, the only problem I could see would be perhaps slight inconvenience of not being situated on your campus and having to move out of there and, you know, relocate your research to the centre. But other than that, it was all very positive.
I think that's really good. I think that, you know, what you've actually painted is a really good picture of the benefits of actually having a very mature, sustainable partnership, you know, where a relationship has truly gone into a partnership. I guess and I think we've both experienced that, but I think that this is there's some shifting sands out there, and it's really how maybe an early career academic can get their first engagement with industry. You know, how would you advise an early career academic to actually sort of get a foothold in trying to build a relationship with a company or an industrial sector?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and pretty much all the new academics who start in the departments that I've worked in will ask that question. And I would say that if you haven't already had some industrial experience, then I strongly suggest that you can, you know, that you try and spend at least a couple of weeks somehow or other within a company that's in the sector that you're interested in. Now, obviously, the Academies program, the industry fellowships, is an excellent way to do that. And if you can at all get into a company, even if it is a couple of weeks over the summer or whatever, and just to see how the business operates and what's important to them. I think the whole thing is about relationship building, and there are more other, I mean, if you can't get into the company, then there are other ways in which you can build those relationships with industry. For example, I think you mentioned it earlier on that you can invite your industry, local industry, to come and contribute to the lecturing within the department. In my experience, most of them, when you approach them, are quite happy to come and do a guest lecture, and your students will absolutely love you for it. So that's one way to do it. You can build your relationships through final year projects with companies. So again, you may already have an established relationship with a network of companies for doing projects, but on the other hand, you may have to go out to the companies to do that, to tell them what you can do and suggest maybe starting off via final year projects. Another very useful way to start your collaboration is through placements. So if your degree course has a sandwich year where your students are going out on placement, I know in our university, we would go out and visit those students a couple of times a year, and we would normally meet with their with their industrial supervisor. Use that opportunity to find out about the company, about their challenges, and see if there's anything there that you can do to help them and to initiate some type of engagement with them as well. And I think that's about it.
Well, I think that's a very good list. I think that obviously, if in the days when industry had a lot more money and they potentially also had a corporate social responsibility budget and engagement with the university was a lot easier to justify, then clearly, that was an easier way to build a relationship. I think nowadays with money being much tighter, and I think generally, and I say this generally, it doesn't apply to everywhere, but I do think that some companies basically do find it difficult to be what you might call an informed buyer of research, because they really just don't know what research they may need to solve what problem they may even not know they've got. And so this building the bridge between the universities and industry, I think, is becoming ever more important. And I think you're right. I think that the low cost, least regrets option of things like guest lectures, final year projects, moving through, I guess, to sort of like co-sponsoring PhDs, because that's a nice cheap way. But as you pointed out, Eileen, right from the start, I think some companies who are new entrants want results yesterday, as opposed to 3 years hence. So it's got to be a horses for courses solution, really, I think, to move that forward. Does your university actually have a non-academic external stakeholder sort of commercial team that actually helps build those bridges and opens doors for young early career academics?
Well, we have a unit within the university, but I would say that it's not, its main aim is not to get young academics linked into industry. They're engaged in other issues with, say, ongoing research and looking at IP and all of those areas. And they will help in formulating large projects, for example, or in the past it would have been European Union networks and getting people engaged in that type of work. But I would say generally that the young academics have to depend on their mentors to try and help them get those first steps up and into a collaboration with industry. So I would always try and bring people with me, or at least make introductions. And honestly, sometimes it can be quite a difficult thing. It is really, you have to go out and do a selling job at times. And in particular, if it's a new company, or if it's a company like an SME where they have never done any type of research before, and they're people that we really need to get to, because they form a very large part of our industry group, lots and lots of SMEs. And I believe passionately in that, we have to get them engaged in research. We have to get graduate engineers into every SME if we can, and that is going to be a great way to accelerate our growth. But I mean, in some cases, for example, I went to one company who had not done any research before, hadn't engaged with us, but I tried to tell them, had a chat with them and said, look, we can do this, we can do X, Y, and Z in material science, and that might be of use to you. And the managing director said, oh, I don't think so. I don't think, Eileen, we have any need for R&D. But I asked him a few questions about the challenges that he had in his work, and went away, came back about a month later for another short meeting and said, look, based on what you told us last time, this is how I think we could be more targeted and how we could, you know, meet your needs. And he said, okay, well, we'll have a think about it. And a couple of months later, I was very glad to receive a phone call from him to say, okay, Eileen, I think we have a project that we could work on. And that started a really great collaboration that has just grown and grown from that point on. So there was a lot of sales involved in it, to be honest with you. I think a lot of academics are not used to that and are not comfortable with it, but sometimes you just have to do it.
Mm. We're coming towards the end of our chat. I notice there's a couple of questions coming through, but just one other question that I think it may be worth our while just exploring quite quickly, and that's the influence of governments and funders in helping to build these relationships. Do you think that there's enough coming from government to stimulate this relationship building, or from the funding agencies? Is there enough happening, do you think? And have you seen a shift in the right direction, maybe?
Oh yeah, there's been a huge shift from when I began. Whenever I started, actually, there would have been a lot of my colleagues would have done quite a bit of consultancy work with businesses. So you had sort of two camps. You had those academics who did consultancy work, and then you had those academics who just published, did their research and published, and there wasn't very much in between those two. The Research Excellence Framework, or the REF, in its initial format, drove researchers very much towards publications and very low TRL level, very fundamental research. And then, say, for the past 10 years, things have started to change, and now the emphasis is being pushed more towards the impact of your research. And obviously that then requires good collaboration with industry. So it's really all driven by what government is telling us. I mean, they are our masters, and if the university says to us, your promotion prospects are going to be based on how many publications you get, you know, in, you know, highly rated journals, then that's what you're going to do. And if next year they tell you that it's going to be based on impact, then you've got to change. You're going to change to that area. So we are very much driven by what the government is telling the funders. And again, I mean, EPSARC, for example, have changed quite remarkably away more now towards the, you know, an impact statement, for example, was something that didn't occur when I started writing research applications for EPSARC. So we're driven by our masters, so it's really up to them.
I think that you picked up a very good point there, and that is essentially the sort of career development and reward structure for academics. Essentially, in the past, you know, your H number, your ability to actually sort of produce very good output in high quality journals has been something that enabled you to effectively develop your career. And there's been maybe sort of less of an influence or an emphasis on your ability effectively to work with industry, and because how do you measure it effectively? I know you can measure it in terms of the amount of grants you actually receive, but I think that, you know, universities clearly do need maybe to sort of have another closer look at the way in which they do reward their academics, to try and move them towards being much more commercially focused than necessarily writing fantastic papers.
Yeah. I mean, I do think the governments we need to look at, for example, really good examples globally of countries that are highly innovative and doing all the right things. Mm-hmm. And then look at what percentage of funding is being invested at the different levels, the different TRL levels. I think most universities should be looking at having a portfolio of research that spans, you know, the lower half of those levels. But as to what the percentages should be at the minute, I'm not quite sure, and that's why I think we should look to other countries who are doing really well in this area, see what they're doing, and then maybe try and replicate that.
That's a very, very good point. International benchmarking clearly is a very important thing to do. Just again, one other thing, I think there are a couple of questions. There's quite a long one, I think, which actually is right up your street at the minute, Eileen. But just another quick one, and it's the two-way process. What is your view of the Academy's attempts now to try and actually encourage early career industrialists to actually have a spell in university? So if you like, the reverse to the industrial fellowship scheme as we knew it in the Royal Academy, which effectively was early career academics going into industry. Do you see that there's as much value in the other direction, the flow from industry into academia?
Absolutely. Even more of a need, I would say, because we're not particularly good at promoting ourselves. And I've sat on numerous boards where you've had academics and you've had industry, and generally speaking, industry's view of academia isn't particularly good. So anything we can do to get them inside and see what we're actually doing, I think is bound to be good. Never mind what they're going to bring to us in terms of their expertise, but hopefully they will act as ambassadors for the academic world as well when they get out. And as I said before, it's just to do that relationship building is really important by whichever means you achieve it.
It's fantastic. I think I've been waiting for some questions to come through so that we can actually sort of get others involved. I've got nobody effectively who would like to ask a question, I don't think, but there is one here from Ian Kinloch. And just to get into the nitty-gritty, it says here, nowadays I've been in meetings where a major aerospace resin manufacturer has stated it will never develop a new resin system as it will not make a profit over a 5-year time frame for the shareholders. Meanwhile, the end users, Bombardier, Airbus, etc., in the supply chain do not make their own materials. Where will the step changes innovation occur now, and how do we convince risk-averse industries to take them up?
I'm not quite sure I understand that question. Ian, I take it, Ian, you're talking about companies engaging in longer-term research?
Well, that is the question as it stands. I mean, unless Ian would like to come in and actually ask the question himself. I mean, I guess the implication is that you actually have, if you like, a parts manufacturer or a materials manufacturer, and you have an end user. And neither of whom, essentially, I suspect, effectively want to take the risk of actually developing the new material.
Yeah, hi Eileen. So hi. Yeah, so I've been unmuted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
So yes, yes, it was a quite depressing meeting really when a major resin manufacturer, I won't name them in a recorded session, turned around and said, never develop a new system because there's just not the return for the shareholders. So, you know, a lot of the systems we use like carbon fiber and everything else, you take a 10, 15 year investment hit on that. There doesn't seem to be that appetite anymore. So obviously you've mentioned your centre, and I wonder, you know, what you're doing for your collaborative centre can try and prove this idea of getting innovation in, because Airbus don't own the innovation, or Bombardier, as you say, you know, the risk chain, they just use the materials. So how do we attack that supply chain, and who do we convince to take the risk or combine it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ian, and it's a difficult one to answer. I would say that your first step has to be to get those people in that supply chain together within, you know, in the same room. And otherwise, if you're flipping from one to the other, but you're not having a common conversation, you're not going to get anywhere. So if you can get them, you know, a number of players together in formulating your project, I think that's a key step forward. But other than that, if you're fighting with shareholders' interests, it's almost impossible, because, you know, the people you're chatting to, you're speaking to in the company, they're just following what they're being told by the, you know, the people at the top. And very few engineers have the clout to be able, you know, within a company, to be able to fight against that. You know, you can get on your hobby horse and tell them as much as you like about how important long-term research is, but sometimes it's just the bottom line, that's all they're interested in if they're living from day to day. But I do think if you get, the more players you get into that in that supply chain, the more you get in there, the better your chances are making some kind of progress. I'm not sure that answers, but it's the best I could do at the minute, Ian.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for coming in. That's been very helpful. And thanks, Eileen. It seems to be a generic issue here, because there is a question from Sandro Olivo. If he would like to unmute, he can actually ask the question. But it's essentially similarly, it doesn't just apply to materials, it does apply across the board. How can we co-develop genuinely novel technology, which necessarily requires long-term investment? Now, my perspective, of course, is the government needs perhaps come in and actually sort of grease the wheels here. And it just seems to me that maybe something like the Industry Strategy Challenge Fund, which basically provides that funding possibly to enable, the risk to be rather defrayed by the people who are actually developing. So, there is, I think, a need here. And I think a little further down, there's something which may be the same sort of angle, but it's again, is the UK alone essentially in having this problem? Does the UK compare to the USA on how we can actually sort of get this risk-taking financially supported? I mean, I don't know whether you have any perspective outside the UK to see whether or not we're out on a limb in the pack or even leading. I don't know if that's a perspective you have, Eileen.
Well, I think we're okay. I don't think we're any, much worse or much better than any others. But the point that you make, that government, if we've got to the stage now where companies, as Ian mentioned there, are so risk averse that they're not going to put any input into more long-term projects, then we are really in big trouble. And that is the point at which then government does need to come in and start to fund research like that has a much longer term impact, a longer life. And they're going to have to take some of that risk, I think.
In other sectors, and I'm not so sure about the sector that effectively you're most familiar with, Eileen, there are, if you like, large industrial consortia or public-private partnerships to drive innovation through essentially the TRL levels, through the innovation stage. Now, in energy, for example, there has been the Energy Technologies Institute, which was purported to be £1 billion worth over 10 years, co-funded between industry 50% and government 50%. That worked pretty well. It was a 10-year project, but I'm wondering what the interpretation is now that was a 10-year project, but it didn't actually then move forward. The government, I think the industry tried something, but it didn't really, I suppose, become self-sustaining. So it does suggest to me that there needs to still be some underpinning from government, which essentially may be missing in some of these is striving towards new technology development. I mean, I see things changing. I see that, and the government's going to have to do a lot more in terms of, how are we going to get out of this mess after COVID? Where is the government going to put its money to effectively sort of regenerate our technology innovation? I wish I knew. I don't know if you have a perspective, Eileen. I mean, while you're doing that, I'll see if there's somebody else come along here.
Yeah, I don't think I don't have any answers to that, Alan, other than what you suggest, that we are going to need more investment from government in this, in a higher risk area research. I can't really add to that.
No. There was a question here. This is from Hong Biao Dong. Many universities now offer BN, GEM-Eng with industry degrees. Students stay 1 year in industry. There could be resources such as good practice experience of university students learning by doing things, establishing or strengthening research collaborations between the university and industry. If the academy could run seminars or conferences for those with industry degree students to tell the story and share good practice, could that be useful?
It's a good idea. Universities themselves can do a bit more in that regard in terms of keeping having much better contact with the graduates, because they are our ambassadors when they do go into industry. And if we can keep those links with them, then that is a way in which we can,
we have Humbiao Dog to maybe enter the debate. Would you like? Did I put your question correctly, or would you like to sort of elaborate a little bit?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, just want to comment on this. If we say if academy could probably organize this things, this could become nationwide, and if university run it, will be individually. I'm in charge of our colleges, science engineering students, and to building up kind of industry experience or enterprise partnerships. And again, if we run it, or if one university run it, if academy run it, and they have much broader impact and draw much broader attention. And this will also help our students, our future students. Sometimes we're struggling for our students to get a place in industry. And then if this kind of umbrella framework, and then we said this will be mutual beneficial, not only beneficial to students, also benefit to the students, to university. We have a team, and sometimes we're struggling to find places for students. But after 1 year, they come back from 1 year industry, we saw a very big difference. They're much more mature, and then help us to build up a research projects. We'll have some successful story. I think this happened not only to us and to many other universities. So this is an area, yeah.
I think it's a very good point, and Eileen, you can chip in a minute if you like. But I just feel that maybe the academy and the institutions just generally can provide a brokerage type of role in this respect. So I think it is important. We've got a number of questions here, which I'm not sure we're going to be able to go through, but there's some really good ideas coming through. It is to put the specific role maybe of the academy in actually acting as a broker, as a champion. It does already. It may be a bit more specific how we can actually sort of move this forward. I mean, Eileen, have you a perspective at all on the recent question?
Sorry, on the role of the academy, or just in general?
Well, in general, I think that the role of the academy, effectively, that was the sort of the root of that particular last question.
I think it's really up to the universities to facilitate that type of engagement with industry, for their undergraduates, and it's well within their capability to do that. I think it's difficult to measure the benefits of that year out in industry for our graduates. It's unbelievably important for them to get that engagement with industry. They all come back much better off for it. I haven't seen anyone come back who hasn't gained from it. And as I said before, our graduates and our undergraduates they're our ambassadors when they're in these industries, and they're providing a great link for us to that industry, whatever it may be. So anything that can encourage that universities to incorporate that into their degrees and further has to be promoted, I think.
There is a statement more than a question from Roy, and I think the only Roy that I probably know that would be is Roy Kalowski. I mean, he basically says, I haven't had any difficulty in engaging industry. So, I mean, he's got the experience. I don't know whether Roy would unmute and basically give the benefits of his experience very briefly to the people participating. That would be quite helpful. Okay. But I think, oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm here and I've unmuted. Yeah, I think really it's easy for an academic to suddenly think that they're best and less, and latest idea is exactly what industry wants. And it may well be, but the first thing you've got to be able to open the door really and have something that industry wants to speak to you about. And so I say in my chat comment there that you need to do your homework first. Find out what the industry company is struggling with. And let's face it, all of them struggle with something or other. I think once you've got an understanding of that, then you can start to talk knowledgeably about what they're doing. And I think the other thing you have to be careful of is, as academics, we often use scientific speak, which people in industry struggle with at times. And so we have to, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, we have to kind of dumb down some of the things that we talk about and make it more accessible to people in industry. Speak in their terms, they're not necessarily interested in the science behind what we do, but they're more interested in what the value is, you know, what change will it bring about, you know, and I think once you can start to think in those terms, then it becomes much easier to sell the research that ultimately you want them to co-sponsor perhaps. But don't rule out the fact that they're looking for new ideas and new innovation as well. And I think it's, I learned when I used to work for BA Systems many years ago, that it's not what you know, it's who you know that really matters. And I think once you've got access to people in your organization, they can really act as a champion. And let's face it, a lot of our sort of academics, undergraduate students, are potentially in good places to act as our champions. So we should really be looking at our alumni to see who is where they are, what role have they got, because it's about returning favors, isn't it? And I think once you start to do your homework and find out where our previous project students have gone, keep in touch with them, it's surprising how they can actually act as your champion.
No, thank you, Roy. I fully agree. I think that's very much, you know, the voice of experience and the voice of reason. I think the only problem with that, I think, is established relationships are good. I guess it's if either side of that relationship leaves, there needs to be essentially a sustainability built in. And we go back to part of the question that we were debating early on, and that's actually having essentially a disconnected sort of business account management type of arrangement between the two sides, which essentially sustains if the technical people either come or go, or if the technical research area wanes and a new one comes along. So, you know, I think that there does seem to be this need for universities and industries to have much more of a broad business account type of relationship to enable these things to happen. We're moving on very quickly towards the end. I think that there is one thing that I think has happened recently, and I think, Eileen, perhaps you may have a perspective on this, and this is something that I think has worked really well, and that's the recent rounds of centres for doctoral training. I mean, the centres for doctoral training, effectively, I think, have been a cheap entry level for industry, taught in a cohort and a collegiate way. And I think that the PhDs that come out of that are actually much more ready-made for industry, not in terms of their technical contribution, but also, I suppose, in their readiness for industry, because their talk modules tend to teach them how industry thinks and ticks. Do you have a perspective? You know, I just think that these are a great opportunity and they should continue. But and I can't see a downside. Do you agree? Do you think that
I agree. I agree absolutely. I think they're a great idea, great way to get PhD students into industry, foster that collaboration between industry and academia again. I do also think that knowledge transfer partnerships, I think they still exist, but they're an excellent way as well of getting engagement between industry and university, maybe at a slightly lower level. Obviously, you know, you're talking about a 1-year project, maybe 18 months rather than a 3-year PhD. But in my experience, I've had a couple of these in the past where the KTP has ended, and then we've gone on to straight into an EPS or a C-funded project, because the work we've done on the KTP has enabled us to unearth more challenging problems that then have allowed us to formulate a really good fundamental research project that has been funded by EPSRC, for example. So then you've got a company and you've got an engagement that is, you know, the companies never go back. Once they're in the loop and doing the R&D, they stay there. And it's the same if you have an SME, for example, who have never had a graduate engineer work for them. The transformation that you can achieve in a really short time by having their first, say, graduate engineer work there is unbelievable. So, you know, if we want to improve our economy and really get things moving, one of our objectives should be to have every SME have an engineer, a graduate engineer working in there. One of my hobby horses at the minute.
Well, but it is, I mean, it's a very, very laudable thing, because obviously I think, you know, SMEs do struggle to be able to find the funds to actually do what the big corporates can do. So there needs to be a way of actually sort of greasing the wheels and actually giving them access to the sort of, you know, the tremendous capabilities that universities have. And I think anything like that that basically enables SMEs to become more engaged, I think is really great. So we are drawing to an end. I don't think that there's much more coming in. I think we've actually sort of done a really good job sort of painting the landscape, and I think looking at the benefits. I think there are very few pitfalls, and I think that there should not be. I just can't understand how there can be, because I mean, certainly I've seen this big transition from industry doing all of its own research with little reliance on universities, to industry really not knowing what research or what problems it's got. And I think it's that pace. Okay, it's maybe 10 or 20 years perhaps, you know, in certain sectors, but it's that pace of change that people haven't adapted to. And I think, you know, the organisations like the Royal Academy and other institutions perhaps ought to, and are, trying to essentially sort of get this relationship building going a lot more quickly. Do you have any final thoughts after you've listened to some of the comments, Eileen, just to summarise your...
I mean, one thing that I did forget to mention when we were talking about looking at the benefits of research to, you know, the local economy and so on. I mean, one thing that doesn't happen very well is the local development agencies, the local universities and local industry sitting down together to formulate a strategy for their particular area. So you've got bilateral, you know, you've got university, business, development agency, but generally you don't have all three in the room at the same time and trying to, you know, reach an agreed objectives for an area or a sector. So I think that's something that could be encouraged. I don't know how the Academy could encourage something like that, but I think that's something that we should think about in the future as well.
Yeah, and I think we only very briefly touched on the whole skills agenda, and I think that for companies that actually do invest time and money, I mean, time is good enough to a certain extent, but time and money in universities can actually get the pick of the graduates. You know, they you know, in this skills pipeline, I think a little bit of investment up front actually, and time is easier, I think, for industry when money's tight, and so I think that that's really important. Eileen, I'm going to thank you very much indeed. I think that it's always difficult to be reactive, particularly I think in this forum. I think face to face and, you know, seeing the audience is a lot easier. But thank you so much for your contribution. I think that we've had a fantastic debate, and I think you know, between us we've managed to field reasonably well, I think, some of the questions that are coming through, but I think we've sort of painted a landscape that basically says, look, you know, we've got to really do better. There are some great examples. You know, we had Roy coming in and saying, well, there really isn't a problem once you've got the relationship, but we've then started to think, well, you've got to get that relationship in the first place, and those are some of the problems. But thank you very much indeed for your time. And also thanks for everybody that has contributed, and apologies for the messages or the questions that I've not been able to get to. Thanks particularly, I think, to the Royal Academy of Engineering team. It's been seamless. Thank you very much indeed for everything that you've done. Well, it's been seamless from my end. I'm not quite sure what it's been like essentially back at the Academy, but thank you everybody for participating. I'm told the next Academy Cafe will be held on Tuesday, the 27th of October. The speaker will be Professor Trung Q Duong, and the topic will be real-time optimization for mission-critical applications. And we hope that you'll be able to, maybe some of you, you find that of relevance, or at least you can cascade that information around your institutions. There's another trailer here as well, that the Academy is running its research forum virtually this year, and that's going to be on the 17th of November. Information will be available, I'm sure, and will come out. I find that a very, very useful forum, because it does bring together both academics and university and industry people. It's an opportunity as well to sort of hear some of the recent awardees actually present some of their thoughts about the benefits of this sort of engagement. So again, I would definitely suggest that you try and listen to that. So I think with that, thanks to everybody again, and I think we should have about another 2 hours of sunshine. So thank you very much for sitting indoors, and again, thank you, Eileen, and good luck to everybody, and stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.